Not guilty, that's Donald Trump's plea in a major election interference case that has rocked the United States. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. On Thursday, former U.S. President Donald Trump pleaded not guilty to 13 felony counts in Georgia. He's accused of allegedly trying to subvert the results of the 2020 U.S. presidential election in the southern state. Trump supporters say this is all part of what they call a witch hunt and have called on the Georgia Governor Brian Kemp to remove the prosecutor, Fani Willis, from the case. But this is how Kemp responded.
Up to this point, I have not seen any evidence that DA Willis's actions or lack thereof warrant action by the Prosecuting Attorney Oversight Commission. But that will ultimately be a decision that the Commission will make. Regardless, in my mind, a special session of the General Assembly to end run around this law is not feasible and may ultimately prove to be unconstitutional. The bottom line is that in the state of Georgia, as long as I'm governor, we're going to follow the law and the Constitution, regardless of who it helps or harms politically.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration reached a healthcare milestone in its efforts to reduce the cost of prescription medication.
I'm proud to announce that Medicare has selected the first 10 additional drugs for negotiation under the Inflation Reduction Act. 10 additional. Drugs that treat everything from heart failure, blood clots, diabetes, kidney disease, arthritis, blood cancers, Crohn's disease, and so much more. Medicare spends $50 billion a year on these 10 drugs, and American seniors are spending $3.4 billion on out-of-pocket costs.
To discuss this and more, let's bring in our guests. Joining us here in Washington, D.C., Brice Fein is a constitutional lawyer. Eleanor Clift is a political columnist for the Daily Beast. Sean Blackmon is the host of By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik and an activist. And in Delaware, Brandon Brice is a columnist, media personality, and radio host of The Brice is Right. Welcome to all of you. Brandon, let me start with you. So Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to those charges in the Georgia case. And as we've just heard, some Republican lawmakers have been trying to pressure the Governor Brian Kemp into removing Fani Willis, the prosecutor, from this case. Question is, why do they want her removed? And the fact that it's highly unlikely that she is going to be removed, what does that mean for Trump?
Well, you know, there's a couple things here, Anand. First of all, I think on the right, some are seeing this as the president's not getting a fair shake, that he's getting a raw deal, that there's other issues around corruption that aren't being addressed, but because it's Donald Trump, you know, there's a special target in his candidacy to be, you know, indicted. But I think in this case, the governor of Georgia is doing the smart thing, and that's he's saying if the legal system finds an issue, then the legal system and this commission will address it. He's staying out of the politics, which I think is smart. But the challenge is, I think what you're saying, whether you're talking about this DA, this attorney that's prosecuting the president, whether you're talking about in New York, Tish James, the AG, whether you're talking about the Manhattan DA, the challenge is what they're saying and what the right is saying is that it's all people who in the first place wanted to see this president go down. And so I think what's going to be interesting is to see, are the leaders, the governor of Georgia, going to say we're going to let the judicial system determine regardless if it's the president or not?
Brice, there is one other issue. Could these legal cases against Trump render him ineligible to run for any kind of office? I mean, there are some states which want to disqualify him from running, including the state of New Hampshire, which is a key primary state. These states cite Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which says, among other things, and I am just giving you a summary here, you probably know the thing word for word, but this is what we have. It says that no person can serve as president if he or she has engaged in insurrection or rebellion or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. Congress can override this, but you need a two-thirds majority in both houses, and the Republicans, of course, don't have that. But still, can he be rendered ineligible?
Let me first make an observation that the president has not been indicted by any prosecutor. It takes a grand jury, citizens that are selected from the people at large who have to vote an indictment. So the idea that a prosecutor walks in and writes his own ticket is wrong. Now, with regard to the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, it's self-executing in that the norm has already been established in the Constitution, but there has to be a process that gives a fair opportunity for Mr. Trump to dispute that he was engaged in insurrection against the United States after he had taken an oath to support and uphold the Constitution. So at least at present, the criminal charges against Mr. Trump do not include insurrection. So even if he was convicted of all the outstanding charges, he could still run for president. In fact, we had in 1920 someone who was in prison. His name was Eugene Debs, who ran for president. He got over 1 million votes. He had been convicted under the Espionage Act. But there are alternate ways. It doesn't have to be criminal prosecution in order to disqualify someone under Section 3. And so what's happening now is at the various states, the election boards or the secretaries of state are determining at the behest of various voters or groups whether or not Mr. Trump has engaged in insurrection on January 6th or otherwise, which would disqualify him state by state. It's often misunderstood to think that the federal election of a president is a federal issue. It's not. It's 50 different state elections. And right now, there are about a half dozen states where Mr. Trump is being challenged before electoral boards as having violated Section 3, and he'll have an opportunity to respond.
Eleanor, Clift, what do we make of the timing of these multiple cases? I mean, the judge in one of the cases has set a date of March 14th, which is one day before what is known as Super Tuesday here in the United States. That's when a number of primary elections take place. Could the Trump defense claim that this is going to hurt his campaign, or are these things completely separate?
Well, the Trump attorneys are saying that this is an election interference issue, and this is the federal government interfering in the due processes of a presidential election that we hold every 4 years, and the primary races that lead up to it, and they would deprive the former president from being on the campaign trail. Frankly, I don't think any of these judges care one whit about the election season, and they've all been pretty straightforward. Call him Mr. Trump, that Mr. Trump, your personal life is going to have to take second place to your requirements to appear in court. These are criminal charges. These are serious charges. Now, I do think the 4 DAs, if you will, and the special counsel in Washington may get together and sort out some of these trial dates. Some of these trial dates may be aspirational. They aren't going to be able to really get everything done in order to go to trial at the dates that have been stated. But the fact that we're bumping up into a presidential election makes it incumbent, particularly on the part of the special counsel and the charges against the former president that he illegally tried to overturn the election. The voters really should have the opportunity to see how that is resolved by a jury of one's peers, which is the way our system works in this country. So I think you could have some changing of the dates, but nonetheless, they will interfere with the primary calendar. But the former president is now so far ahead that he may well be the putative nominee before any of these elections unwind next year.
Bruce, one other quick point on the court calendar. The Trump defense is also saying that March 14th date, for instance, is too early. It's not going to give them time to prepare for the case. They're talking about millions of pages of discovery that they have to get through, all other kinds of investigations that they have to conduct.
Well, they made the argument and they failed. I think the judge noted Mr. Trump has lots of money. In fact, the money he's raising for his campaign, he's paying for lawyers. It's not as though there's just one person who's looking at these documents. So he's got reams of lawyers that he can hire if he wants to, even if he doesn't want to pay for them. That's his problem. So I do not believe that the date and the argument that he's not been given a fair trial because he was pressed on time to prepare is going to carry any weight whatsoever. He knows what the charges are. It's not as though that this information that he's confronting is just fall from the sky. That this investigation has been in being in some way or another. The media, the January 6th commission in Congress, various civil cases for years. So he's not taken by surprise. And I don't think he will have a chance to argue successfully that he hasn't had a fair trial.
Right. Sean Blackmon, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. There are many, many Trump supporters, Sean, who allege that what we are seeing is what they call a vigorous effort by what they term the Biden Department of Justice to lock up the president's leading political opponent in the run-up to the 2024 presidential election. I mean, we hear words like the weaponization of the Department of Justice, the politicization of the Department of Justice. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that this is really based on a narrative that Trump has built with his base of basically political persecution coming from Joe Biden and the Democrat Party. And it is a very potent and effective narrative that has really gained a serious foothold amongst his supporters. And I think, unfortunately, for Joe Biden and the Democrats, they have no one but themselves to thank for that being the case. I mean, for me, a lot of this goes back and is really rooted in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, following this attack on the Capitol that Donald Trump did, in fact, order as sitting president. There was this strange paralysis that settled into the political mainstream in this country, and we didn't see a swift arrest or charging of Donald Trump. And if what liberals wanted to do was to sort of put the nail in the coffin of Trump politically, that would have been the moment to do it. But they squandered that moment, opting instead to go for a completely pointless impeachment process where I think Trump only had a couple weeks left in office. And so, of course, it was totally ineffective, had no impact on Trump. And as a result, what has happened now is that that whole moment of Trump's base being disillusioned and confused, elements of the military and the Republican Party trying to distance himself from him, all that is gone. And so now Trump has been fully and thoroughly reintegrated into the Republican Party, and he's been embraced once again by his base and has gotten them to buy in to this narrative of political prosecution. And people, I'm sure, saw the fact that when Trump's mugshot was made public, that it was used as campaign materials, which I thought was completely predictable. And so Donald Trump's legal case only stands to help him in the campaign in 2024. And that it doesn't bode well, I think, for the Democrats, who will likely try to hit this point about his legal trouble over and over again. But I tend to think it'll be to no avail.
Brendan, Brice, to Sean's point about the fact that these cases only were brought long after January 6th, it seems like Trump has folded these indictments, these legal cases, into his campaign. As Sean pointed out, he's using the mugshot to raise money for his campaign. But despite all these indictments, it seems it is working. He's surging in the polls. He's got a double-digit lead over most of his Republican rivals for the nomination in the Republican Party. And it seems every time he's indicted, that increases. It goes up by a few more points. And there was an Emerson poll which shows that he would actually win the presidential election if it were held right now by 2 points. I mean, how does one explain this?
Anand, the Democrats have not realized that Donald Trump is not your typical politician. This is a guy that's been in your living room for 30 and 40 years. This is a guy who feeds off of publicity. Doesn't matter if it's bad or negative. I mean, the fact that that mugshot is going down in history as the mugshot heard across the world, that was a battle cry. That was not a mugshot. That was a battle cry to conservatives that says capitalism and Trumpism is under attack, and we need your support. And what it's doing, you're seeing where his polls are increasing, the poll numbers are jumping up, the funding, the dollars that are going to support the campaign has risen, has increased. And now, I mean, if you even look at it, no one's coming close when you're talking about who's the front runner for the nominee. I mean, it's double digits. So what's happening is that I think what they've done, the Democratic Party, unfortunately, has created a martyr in Trump. And the more that he's got this victimization that, you know, the left is coming out of me, the FBI is weaponizing my campaign, the stronger this guy's going to be. And I can tell you, the more that they talk about Donald Trump and the less that they talk about the president makes him much stronger in 2024. And I always say, let the people decide. Let the people decide who they want to vote for in 2024, and I think you'll be surprised.
Brendan, does this also tell us, looking at the numbers, and also, as you point out, at the dollars that are rolling in, that at least half the American voting population are not buying into these indictments. They're not buying into these legal cases against Trump?
Well, you know what it is? I don't think the Democratic Party, I mean, let's be honest, you know, and no man is above the law. If the president broke the law, he deserves to do the time. I don't think that's what conservatives are saying. I think what they're saying is, well, wait a minute, you can't hold this guy accountable. But again, you're not holding the president's son, who works directly close with the president, who has charges. And unfortunately, the FBI has got amnesia when it comes to anything related to Hunter Biden or going back to Hillary's emails. So I think what they're saying is, wait a minute, we're not saying that this guy shouldn't face the judicial system. We're saying that the judicial system isn't fair, and it's picking and choosing winners and losers. That's the problem here, and the American people can see it.
Brice, that is something else that we've heard very often, that there's a double standard when it comes to these cases, that the Department of Justice is not acting in the same way against Hunter Biden, for instance, President Biden's son, that is, and the president himself, as opposed to the way that they are taking the cases to Donald Trump.
Well, it seems to me there's a ready distinction. First of all, there hasn't been any settlement of the Hunter Biden case. There's an attempted plea bargain I thought was too light, but it fell apart for various and sundry reasons. So we don't exactly know what the disposition of Hunter Biden is. But whatever it was not trying to destroy the United States Constitution, the peaceful transfer of presidential power, the rule of law over rule of kings, which is what Mr. Trump has been accused of in the January 6th indictments. That is the worst crime that's imaginable other than a civil war at Fort Sumter in 1861. So, of course, in my judgment, Mr. Trump should be treated far more harshly. He's trying to undo the American Revolution of 1776. And I can quote to you, Mr. Trump, July 23rd, 2019. Then I have Article 2, where I have the right to do anything I want as president. Now, that is the statement of a tyrant. He's never retracted it. For whatever reason, the Republicans never attacked him. And that's the distinction of why Mr. Trump deserves harsher treatment than Hunter Biden. And I'm no defender of Hunter Biden for sure. He should go to prison. But Mr. Trump, he should be excluded. The Constitution is not a suicide pact. And the reason why we have Section 3 in there, we didn't want Jefferson Davis, who led the Confederacy, to run for president, you know, after he had attempted to destroy the United States. And Mr. Trump, in my judgment, and many others, violated his obligation under Section 3 to avoid trying to engage in insurrection to prevent Mr. Pence from counting the electoral votes. This idea also of intent not being shown seems to me frivolous. Remember the uncontradicted testimony of Vice President Mike Pence on the morning of January 6th. He has said, Mr. Trump demanded that he choose between Trump and the Constitution, which means Trump knew the difference between himself and the Constitution. He wanted Mr. Pence to do the wrong thing, and that's why he's got 4 indictments against him.
Eleanor, I want to get back to these polls that we were talking about. That Emerson poll that I was talking about that shows Donald Trump winning by 2 points. If you factor in a third candidate, that would be Cornel West, who represents the Green Party. If he's factored into those calculations, then Donald Trump wins by 5 points. I mean, as it stands, Cornel West doesn't get enough votes to become president himself. But he could, I mean, people who are opposed to his candidacy say he could take away votes from Biden, which would be handing the presidency to Donald Trump. I mean, is that a realistic scenario given, as was pointed out earlier by someone, that this is not a national election for president, it's a state-by-state, 50 separate elections?
Right, and there are probably 6 or 7, maybe 8 battleground states. that are going to decide the election. And some people have made the argument that it's really just 4 states where this campaign will be won or lost. And the former president and the current president are competitive in those states. Mr. Biden actually won there in Arizona in particular, and Georgia were big wins for Democrats who haven't won in those states for some time. And the margins are narrow. This is going to be a 49 to 51% election, and some people think it could go either way depending on what happened the week before or the month before. I mean, it's going to be a close election. But I certainly agree with Mr. Fein that Donald Trump has sought to undermine our democracy, and actually he's accomplished that to a great degree. He's created a lot of questioning about the justice system, about voting, all advanced without any evidence that could pass any court, even in a court presided over by a judge that he appointed, and that has not passed muster in the Supreme Court. And yet he continues on by the force of his personality. And we are in a divided country, so it's going to be very close election. But I have to believe, when I look at women, I look at the suburbs, and I look at some of the issues here that are at stake, and I look at young people, and I look at the climate change and the serious issue, gun violence, coming to the fore. And the former president is not campaigning on any policies at all that would address any of the country's problems. He's just addressing his own grievance that he feels he should have won in 2020, and he cannot accept it. And I think that as the months unfold and the seriousness of the cases against him, and if he is convicted by a jury of his peers, you may see some voters really come to grips with the fact that he's not just an entertaining figure, that he's a seriously dangerous figure for this country. Right. So I don't think he could win a general election. Right. He can win a Republican primary.
Sean Blackmon, getting back to Cornel West's candidacy, he's been on the media around the country, on the national media. He's been asked again and again on the mainstream media if he is what they call a spoiler candidate. But West says he represents another choice. He's an alternative. It's diversity. And he also points out that on the core issues, there is not much difference. Things like waging war, things like money for the military, things like looking after corporate interests in the United States. On those major issues, there isn't much difference between the two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. Does he have a point?
I tend to agree wholeheartedly with Dr. West's analysis of the sort of general thrust of the two ruling class parties in this country, the Democrats and Republicans. And this whole narrative of a quote unquote spoiler candidate that we hear every single election cycle in this country is fundamentally dishonest. It's the Democrats that spoil themselves for their ongoing refusal to put anything forth or accomplish anything for the segment of the electorate that they consider their base. One of the panelists just mentioned women a moment ago. I mean, time and time again, when Democrats were in power and had the leverage, they refused to codify Roe into law. And then Joe Biden, when a Roe gets overturned, instead of using his powers to actually try to protect the right to abortion, what do the Democrats do? They send out fundraising emails. And so this is all based upon this very faulty idea of a Cornel West or a Green Party or a Party for Socialism and Liberation or some other alternative party supposedly taking votes from Joe Biden or whoever the Democratic nominee is at the time. It presupposes that they're entitled to this vote without having to actually earn it. And this is the fundamentally abusive dynamic that the Democrats, and I think to a large extent the political mainstream in general, has to the masses of voters in this country. You see, the people are never supposed to expect to gain anything from their vote. They're only supposed to give their vote to stave off what is supposedly the worst case scenario, which is whoever is the Republican boogeyman of the day, which, of course, in this instance is Donald Trump, who is being presented as some kind of unique evil in American politics. But I think if one takes the long view of history, that isn't really the case. I think the only sort of real difference with Trump is his presentation. And so, and this is why I think we see Joe Biden and the Democrats publicly talking about their concern about not getting support from some key aspects and segments of the electorate that they know they'll need to win, namely Black people. And this administration is very aware that they've really achieved nothing at all for Black people in this country in the time of Joe Biden's presidency. And all they really have to say is, well, I'm not the other guy. My name is not Donald J. Trump.
Yeah.
And for that reason, for that reason alone, I deserve your vote. But I think as time goes on, this same tired narrative, I think, will grow thinner and thinner and thinner, especially as people in the United States see their conditions get worse and worse as hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of their tax dollars are going to this, meat grinder war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the cost of everything is going up and the wages are staying the same. And I think the Democrats will find themselves in a very precarious position if they're not able to actually present something to the electorate that they can actually sink their teeth into, because this whole lesser evil argument, I think, is beginning to run out of gas.
Right. Brandon, I've only got about a minute left, but I was wondering, to what extent do you believe that the current legal action that we're seeing against Donald Trump is going to lead to a deepening of divisions in the country, more polarization, and will it set a precedent for future administrations when they say, look, we're going to take revenge against our political opponents? In fact, Trump said a day ago, he said he would have, to quote, quote, no choice but to lock up political opponents because they are doing it to us.
I think this is a very dangerous sentiment when we're talking about using government agencies and the judicial system to go after our enemies. And I think what's going to happen is, if not Trump today, who's tomorrow? Could it be Biden tomorrow? Could it be Hillary tomorrow? I mean, I think this is a very bad narrative. But you asked about this case. I think the longer that this trial continues, the president's brand is going to get stronger. The president is going to be more, the Republican base is going to rally behind this president. And even if he's not the nominee, he's got a voice, and his endorsement will matter in 2024 if he's not able to run.
Okay, well, thank you to all of you for being with us. I'm sorry we couldn't get to the prescription drug price issue, but we'll do it the next time. That's where we have to leave it. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.